but the game makes up for it with its impressive presentation in terms of visuals and sound. In this regard, this is an example of a game that can really define what the NES is capable of if developers put their mind to it, and the end result is a pretty spectacular looking game. All this would have meant nothing if the gameplay wasn't worth a damn, and fortunately Return of the Joker is a solid game in its own right, and worthy of any NES library worth their salt. The Sega Genesis did receive a version of this game called Revenge of the Joker, but despite the 16-bit facelift and the additional colors, the game actually looks and sounds a bit substandard. Definitely nowhere near as good or polished as the NES version, which is just a testament to how well made that NES game was. As such, I'd suggest staying away from the Mega Drive version and going with the superior 8-bit NES version. You know, I should probably make a mental note to myself to follow my own advice that I put in these videos, and honestly, in regards to today's subject matter, that shouldn't have been too difficult of a proposition considering how hard to find today's subject matter happens to be. Coincidentally, a buddy of mine who shall remain nameless had a copy on hand, and I figure I'd borrow it for the sake of giving it a try and who knows, maybe get a video out of it, and now I kinda wish I hadn't gone that route. Released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis courtesy of Sunsoft and Ringler Studios, Batman Revenge of the Joker is a 16-bit conversion of the Batman Return of the Joker video game that graced the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System the previous year, a visually and technically impressive and otherwise decent video game. Now let's get some preliminary information out of the way. Batman Revenge of the Joker is a side-scrolling action platform game where you assume control of the Caped Crusader and make it from point A to point B in each level on your way to the main boss. Batman's weapon of choice in this game is a wrist blaster that shoots many batarang looking things, but by breaking open crates and things of that nature, he can acquire other weapons along the way such as homing missiles and a slow but powerful blaster type thing. If you hold down the fire button while equipped with any of the additional weapons, you'll charge your weapon and fire a powerful shot. Some enemies will drop pods that will charge your bat meter, or whatever you want to call it, and collecting 8 of these pods will allow you to transform Batman into a Super Batman type character, for lack of a better name, which gives you a super blaster sort of thing and invincibility for a limited amount of time. Unlike the NES game, however, where this would be automatically activated once you get your 8 icons, you need to activate this ability on your own by pressing all the face buttons down. And sometimes it doesn't work all that well or even last that long, so in the end of the day, why even bother? Revenge of the Joker comprises 7 levels, each divided into 2 or 3 rounds. At the end of 5 of these stages, you'll fight a boss, which is actually structured a bit differently from the usual platforming stuff, mostly in the case of Batman suddenly able to withstand more than 8 hits, as was the case in the main levels. Naturally, you beat the boss and you kill him and you move on to the next stage. Levels 2 and 5 lack any boss encounters, but instead you have this shooter style segment where Batman is on a jetpack and shooting down various robots and other things. Once you get past all that, you clear the level and move on to the next. The game offers unlimited continues whenever you exhaust your 3 tries, and should you want to resume your adventure at a later time, you simply pause the game to see the password for the current stage that you're on. Okay, let's get this out of the way. Control in Revenge of the Joker is a dumpster fire. There's an option menu where you can choose from various button mappings, and that's fine and dandy, but there's no option in the game that gives you good working control, which I feel is a vital component to any worthwhile platformer. Charging your powered weapons doesn't always work. It seems whenever you move, you can't charge, so you gotta sort of stand still and not touch the D-pad whenever you want to charge your gun, and sometimes even that doesn't work all that well. Contrast to the NES version where the only time I could not charge my weapon was when I had the default gun. Otherwise, if I was moving or ducking or jumping or whatever the case may be, all I had to do was press and hold the B button and I would charge my weapon, whatever it may be. Sometimes there would be instances where jumping wouldn't work when I wanted to. I mean, sometimes I'd press a button and Batman jumps like normal. Sometimes there's a lag of a quarter to a half a second which screws up my timing. And then on rare occasions, I'll press a jump button and nothing will happen. There will be instances where I'd want to leap off a platform to another and I'd press that jump button and Batman just walks off the platform and falls down. It feels almost broken in a way, like they took controls of an earlier version and made them worse than before. And that's pretty goddamn pathetic if you ask me. Now in all fairness, I don't want to be too negative here. Revenge of the Joker does give Batman an additional attack, a kick. And you do this by pressing the designated kick button. You could use the kick to smash crates and statues fairly quickly, and it even makes for a fairly damaging melee attack if you want to go that route, even though there's no real reason whatsoever to do so. Batman can slide by pressing down and kick instead of down and jump like it would be in the NES game, which is an adjustment, but it works, I guess. And while you could theoretically do a jump kick in the air, I've tried it a couple times, it doesn't work that well, because in order to have the full animation and thus the full effect, you have to hold the kick button down while airborne, and if you just let go, he won't do the animation, and it's just terrible. Other than a couple instances, I hardly ever use the jump kick. The standard kick, on the other hand, is useful for breaking crates quickly and is a nice addition, and that I use every once in a while. You see, this review isn't all negative, just most of it. But again, I digress. While control may have been the greatest issue in Revenge, there are certainly other factors that contribute to not only the overall unpolished quality of the game, but also adds to the overall difficulty of a game that was already fairly challenging to begin with. Now, I can play the NES original with some competency. I've beaten the game on a couple occasions with some admitted hardships, but it's a game that I bear some familiarity with. And in playing Revenge on the Genesis, I noticed some gameplay changes that were made, and I don't know why they made these changes, because in my mind they make the game a little worse for it. And while the bad control hinders the package somewhat, and I guess you could include some spotty collision detection in some regards, what really brought down the quality of the game were the boss fights. See, the boss fights in Return of the Joker were fast-paced, challenging affairs that felt like a war between combatants trapped within an enclosed area. Unlike the rest of the game where you could only take a couple hits before dying, here Batman has a little more stamina to withstand whatever is tossed at him, and whatever weapons he brought to the table would be useful tools of destruction to dwindle his opponent's health to nothing. And if you failed and you had to try remaining, you not only restart at the boss fight, but you also got to keep your powered up weapon, which was somewhat of an uncommon practice in those days. Return of the Joker may have been overwhelming at times, but it did toss you a bone or two in the boss fights, and that was a good thing because it made them fun and exciting. The boss fights in Revenge of the Joker, on the other hand, were about as enjoyable as enduring a root canal. Your shots don't do as much damage, not all your shots hit because bosses have a momentary invisibility period after each registered hit, which didn't exist in the NES version. The collision detection issues that plague the main platforming segments are equally selective here, and if you died in these boss fights, well, you restarted at the boss fight, but you also lost your weapon and were forced to use your woefully underpowered default weapon, which is completely and utterly worthless in these boss fights, especially the later ones. You might as well throw in the towel and restart again because you were going to be fighting a futile battle. But do you want to know the real kicker about Revenge of the Joker? You never get a health refill. At all. While there are no in-game pickups that restore your health, if you beat a stage on the NES version, either by defeating the boss or clearing a shooter segment, you'd start the next stage with a clean bill of health. But Revenge of the Joker doesn't even give you that much. You exit a stage with 1 health bar, you beat the boss, you clear the shooter segment, then goddamn kid, you start the next stage with 1 health bar, and the only way to refill your health is to die. Even Batman Forever, those woefully terrible games, had the courtesy of refilling your health between stages. This is just lousy. Graphics in Revenge of the Joker are not that great. With the additional bits, the game does have more color added to it, and while it might seem like a step up, that doesn't mean much when the overall visual style of the game is less than appealing, or not even close to scratching the surface of what would constitute good-looking visuals for that matter. Batman here may be recognizable in its most iconic form at the time. The character designs look really awkward and not good, the level design is none too appealing, the various intermissions and mugshots are less than stellar looking. But then you set this game side by side with the NES original, a visual spectacle with a lot of cool parallax effects to give the game a certain vibe and a certain mood. And then you play it on the Genesis and there's a very notable downgrade in visual quality. A lot of the effects that made the NES game cool are missing here, and it just looks less impressive or worse as a result. But on the bright side, Batman has a bit of a cool idle animation that wasn't in the NES original, and it looks cool. So I guess that's one good thing in this game. So never mind. Sound in Revenge of the Joker is also not that great. Sound effects range from tinny weak saws to ear-grinding pain inducers, and that's as far as I'll go in that regard. The music is more or less the same as what you got on the NES original, at least in terms of the melodies and the tunes, but the instrumentation and the atmosphere is just lacking. There's no energy, there's no punch to the tunes, they're practically devoid of soul and intensity. I mean, the original Return of the Joker version on the NES had some impactful chiptunes that felt supercharged, got you pumped up and ready for anything the game would throw at you. And then those tunes would make their way over to the Sega Genesis and just went limp. And that's a bit of a disappointment. Batman Return of the Joker is a highlight on the NES library, challenging so-so gameplay but an audio-visual spectacle that needs to be experienced at least once or twice, especially if you're an NES owner. Batman Revenge of the Joker, on the other hand, is a low point on the Mega Drive library, broken, unpolished, and an audio-visual cesspool. For anyone who harps on the need for more powerful hardware being necessary to run the best quality video games, here's the ultimate counterpoint. A 16-bit Sega Genesis title that took a tour de force on the 8-bit Nintendo and turned it into absolute shit and only serves to remind you of how much of a better game you got on the lesser hardware. Now, if you like the NES version and never got to play this Mega Drive version, then by all means, don't. And even if you never cared for the NES version, this is not much better and it won't change your mind in the slightest. But if you've never played that NES Return of the Joker game, then I'd suggest playing that NES Return of the Joker game. Don't bother with this one, it's not worth tracking down.